again. So we're in 10-5A. And in 10-5A, they want us to create a program that instantiates a class called automobile. And by default, this automobile will get some default values when we construct it. Now, there's some things that we're going to go over in here that I've kind of skipped. I don't want to say skipped over. I just haven't dug deep into them. I just want to reiterate a little deeper. So a couple of concepts as we go through this. Okay. So let's go ahead and start out. We're going to create our class. Come down to the end. There's our class, and we've got this iComparable. What does iComparable do for us? Well, we've done it before, but I didn't dig deep into it. Let's talk about it for a second. Now, iComparable will return an integer. I'm going to go ahead and add in our iComparable method. iComparable is our ability to compare two objects to see that, in essence, what it boils down to is if I had two objects and I had to sort them out in some way, will the one you're comparing it to end up ahead of it in a sort, behind it in a sort, or at the same position when we were sorting them out? Okay. So that's where we end up with this 1, -1, or 0 as a return value. And that helps us to understand if I'm comparing two objects and I had to sort them out, this method allows us to compare them. Without this, we can't effectively compare two objects. Now, aside from that, we've got some more comparison we're going to add in here. But this comparison that we're going to add in is the equals method. Now, the equals method, unlike the iComparable that returns a number, 0, 1, or -1, the equals method will return a Boolean. Since it returns a Boolean, it's essentially returning whether these things are the same or not. Okay? So, our class has an equal method associated with it. And if you pass it another object, it will then be able to compare those two objects to find out if they are equivalent or not. So if we want to compare two objects, these objects, we've got two ways to go about it. We can use the compare to, and that will let me know if it was a sort, where it fell in a sort. The equals just tells us if they're equivalent or not. Now, if they're equivalent, here's something that we've got to add in, and if we don't add it in, we could have an issue. And it comes to this override that we have right here before Boolean. Now, there's a concept called a hash. I'm going to go ahead and add in our get hash code method right after our equals method. All right. So the get hash code, in essence, a get hash code gets the hash that is created when we instantiate each object. So each object has a unique value. And that unique value we call a hash code. It should uniquely identify an object, and there are instances that, as we get into deeper and more advanced concepts in C#, you'll actually use the hash code. There are rare instances where a hash code could potentially be the same, but it's not something that we dig into when it comes to this level of C# programming. So when I'm using the equals method, I also need to include this public int override get hash code method that returns the ID number of the hash code itself. Okay, so these three methods allow us to compare instances of our class that we're creating, this automobile class. So we've got all this functionality in here, but we still don't have anything when it comes to our class. So what is our class going to be? Well, let's go ahead and come up with something for our class. And our class will have an ID number, a make, a year, and a price. We've got 4 different values or attributes associated with our automobile. Now, we're going to define a constructor. This constructor for automobile, we're going to pass it these values as default values. 999, ZZZ, 0, and 0. ID number, make, year, and price. Okay. So, if nobody set them, we've got values there. Now, we've kind of run into this before, where if I pass by reference and I have not initialized that value yet, if I try to use it, it's going to throw me an error because I don't have anything there to actually use. We're passing by reference, and we try to reference something that doesn't contain any value, it's going to throw us a problem. This helps us with that by initializing it with some default. Let's come up and let's deal with our main now. So we've come up with a class. Let's go ahead and I've got one thing missing here. One thing missing is the front of my initial constructor. There we go. So our initial constructor will pass automobile a num, the make, the year, and the price. I thought I went through and I said it here, but I hadn't pasted it up above. So here's the constructor if no values passed. I should say the second one's if no values passed. The first one is if values are passed. So let's go deal with the main. And in our main, we're going to create an array to store the different types of automobiles. That's something we've done already. So we've got an array of automobiles, and it will hold 8 different types of automobiles. We've got a couple of variables to help us get through some nested loops a little bit later. We're going to have a grand total, whether a number is good or not. And now here's our for loop to allow us to check, or at this point, this is going to allow us to instantiate each of those automobile objects in our automobile array. So if we're going to do that, let's go ahead and nest that in here. So in our for loop, put a little curly brace up front, one behind. So here's our for loop, and in our for loop, we've got the first line instantiates an instance of the automobile class using the default constructor with no values passed, and that will be right here. That'll be this one. And then we say go ahead and enter an automobile ID number. We convert that value and assign it to an attribute for that first automobile object. So that number is good, and from there we're going to come down with another loop. We'll have a for loop here that in this for loop we're going to do some comparison. And the comparison is we're going to check to see if automobiles X equals automobiles X. Are these two objects the same? Now, we're going to come back with, after that, a while loop. And while that number is not good, you need to go back through this thing and enter a good number. So essentially, it's checking to see if the value that you just passed in already exists in that loop. So it's going to go back through all the preceding values in automobile. Now, since we're comparing two objects, are we actually comparing them? Well, with equals, it is a comparison of sorts. It's just saying, are they equivalent? Are these two values equivalent? What's the data type for those values? Well, they're integers. Well, if two integers are the same, they equal each other. It's not like we're comparing words right here. So if they're the same, it's not a good number. And if it's not a good number, we're going to come down into this while loop. So at this point, we're going to assume that the number is good, and we've gone through this loop up above, and that would be the loop here, and populated this thing with automobile ID numbers. Now, let's go ahead and in that loop, I don't want just the ID numbers. So I want to be inside this loop here. I also want, I'll be here in this, right at the end of it, I want more data. I want the make, year, and price. So, here's the thing. Initially, when I first started recording this one video, I said we need to have some value in these attributes so that should we compare them, we have something to compare. That's what this constructor here did. If at some point I have those values, I can use that other constructor. But this one right here allows us to create an instance of automobile that has values in those attributes by default. And then as I'm populating them, the first time I go through that loop to populate the first index in that array, I go to compare. I have something to compare to. Now, this should be all right to go ahead and run this thing. It should run without issue. It says we created grand total, we never actually used it. We'll use it in the next exercise. This is one of those exercises where it just builds beyond this. Let's go run this and see if Cody likes it and if we did what we were supposed to do. And this one, saying we're at halfway. Accepts data for 8 automobiles and displays them sorted by ID number. Well, I did miss a little something, and it's not a lot. I don't have my output in there. Let's go ahead and sort our array and do a little bit of output. So outside of that population loop that we created, let's go ahead and sort out our array of automobiles and display them in a right line. Go ahead and run it and see if it's happy now with the output. There, accepted the output, and we're good on this one now. This is something we've already done this in more than one object-oriented programming exercise. So this should have been there, done that for us. Okay. So we used the array.sort, passed it our object, did a right line, and then we went through that object item by item to accumulate a grand total of the price of the automobiles. So that said, I'll see you in the next exercise, 10-5B.